Weeks away. I hope you are all doing well and looking forward to time with our guest speaker this morning. Jake Gallen is joining us, as you know, as a UNLV alumnus, a podcast host, and a growing thought leader in the cryptocurrency area. He's here today to talk to us about the nightlife. How many of you went out last night to the clubs?
Oh, wow.
No wonder I didn't see any of you. I'm just joking. Anyway, we're going to be talking a lot about resources today in the form of money, which obviously drives the Strip. You know, from our podcast, we've talked about different topics like how sexuality gets monetized, gender dynamics on the Strip, and what it means for hosts to actually control the Strip and the job roles that they do. Because Jake is an alumnus, I thought it would be an extra special opportunity for you all to interface with him this morning. We also have his Instagram up for his podcast, and then he has his own Instagram account as well if you'd like to connect that way and stay in touch via social media. In the meantime, please join me in welcoming Jake to our Power class. I also want to mention that with permission from the university, Jake and his team are recording our time together. The way that it works is that no student identifiers are captured as part of the recording, so your images will not be captured. The camera is focused on us, just your voices might come up in the recording. So I do want to let you know that just to help you be aware and kind of understand why this equipment is here today. So Jake, I want to say thank you once again for coming to class. Welcome back to UNLV.
Oh man, it's been 5 years since I've been here, so thank you for the opportunity. This is very special for me to come back and give back to our alma mater.
Yes, tell us what you've been doing since you graduated.
Oh man, so a little background from me. I'm born and raised out here in Las Vegas, 29 years old. Have had a few different entrepreneurial endeavors. Since I graduated, I opened up an antique store. That was my first business. Then I dove down the world of technology, opened up a ticket verification app, got into cryptocurrency the same time. And now, up until recently, as you guys have heard, I worked at Nightclub for about 5.5 years, up until the pandemic. When the pandemic happened, I realized that the world was shifting in a different direction, started the podcast, and dove even deeper into the world of cryptocurrency. I have an independent crypto research firm out here called Native Research, and we host blockchain meetups once a month over at Blackfire Innovation, which is a 140-acre property actually owned by UNLV that's geared to become the tech hub for the city. And so I'm focused on, I do 2 episodes per week with the podcast, talking with entrepreneurs in the city, whether they're a content creator, a professor, a casino executive, a politician. I'm just trying to shed light on all the people out here in Las Vegas that are doing something with their life or trying to push the city forward. And then also with my crypto side, got really into NFTs, if anyone knows what that is. Have a lot of big things going, selling some NFTs at the end of the year at some big auction houses. So that's a lot to look forward to with a lot of different things. But my background was working on the Strip for 10 years. 5 years at Planet Hollywood Pool, and then 5 years at Omnia. And so that's what helped me understand the power dynamics of what actually controls the Strip.
And similar to when Dr. Bloomfield was here, I have some questions I'm going to ask Jake. At any point, however, please feel free to ask him questions. He's really here to talk with all of you and to get your read on our podcast, on resources and power. What does the word power mean to you living here in Las Vegas?
Ooh, wow. Power is... It's about control, because out here in Las Vegas, the money is funneled through the Strip. As we know, Vegas is a very tourism-dependent town. When the pandemic happened, we had the highest unemployment rate, 30%. So we haven't been able to bridge off of that. So the casinos really have power. And then even when you circle even more in depth to the Strip, the women, in my opinion, actually have more power on the Strip than the men do. I think I said this actually in the podcast, but if all of the men disappeared off the Strip would probably function pretty fine. If all the women disappeared, nobody would come at all. And so that's kind of something that I noticed while I was working within the industry.
Now in the podcast, we talk about the dark side of nightlife. What drew you to that industry?
I'm gonna be honest, I was a big party kid for a long time. I was a big rave kid. Going out here at UNLV, used to go out to the nightclubs when I was 21, used to go to EDC. And then when EDM kind of took over the Strip beginning 2011, when EDC first moved out here, that attracted me even more to the Strip, having people like Calvin Harris and Tiesto and Zedd and all these major EDM artists playing at this potential nightclub. And then also hearing about kind of the ludicrous nature of the nightclub, working in it, and also making an abundant amount of money, it just gravitated me there, and that's why I went and applied for it.
Now, let's say I'd never been in a club, which unfortunately is not true. How would you describe the power ladder or the hierarchy of the different positions and roles in a nightclub?
Yeah, so it's similar to, I'll start with the bottom-up approach. We'll say the janitors or the porters are called is the bottom, and then it goes bussers, which was my position. A busser's basically a busser. So whenever you get table service, there's a busser and a cocktail waitress or a bottle girl that accompanies the table, and then it moves up to bartenders, and then probably managers, then cocktail waitress, then hosts at the top.
Got it. Now, when I read this article about the economics of a VIP party, one aspect that I was struck by, and I want your take on it, is how much hosts or promoters, and we can talk about the difference, and the women that are involved in these sort of nightlife scenes, they perceive that if they are with a billionaire, they in turn will have their new business venture funded. The article talks a lot about how much this is a false reality, because the likelihood of a host or a woman in this industry actually becoming an entrepreneur through these relationships, I mean, the statistics are so low. How do you respond to that? Why do you think people do think that associating with billionaires at a club is going to make them the next, entrepreneur?
Yeah, there's a few different approaches to it. I think you can either extract social clout from whoever's paying for the table, but then you can extract a lot of money from it too. I did have a woman on my show. Her name's Katie Chunghwa. She was a server at one of the nightclubs, and now she's a very popular athletic coach and internet personality. In the podcast, she mentioned that she had realized very early that the gatekeepers to these high net worth individuals was lowered, and so that she could basically have a billionaire in front of her and she could pitch the idea, but then also use her sexuality to kind of lure them in and bring whatever they need to it. And oftentimes those guests or the people who are purchasing VIP table service, the server will go out with them afterwards, so then you could get them in a different setting. So I think that, to me, I think that's somewhat false, because I have seen a lot of servers actually gain a lot from their guests outside of just a mutual friendship.
What would be an example of what you see servers gain through access to the high net worth individuals?
I've seen a lot of tickets, events, kind of like they go out with the guests and they'll go gamble with them. I've seen something similar, which is going to sound really crazy. Some servers went out with a whale, we'll call him whale. Whale is generally somebody who spends millions of dollars at a casino or a nightclub. They went out with them afterwards, and the whale gave them money to gamble with. And at the time it was $250,000 per person. And the whale basically told them that if you lose money, it's okay, but if you win money, then you just pay back what the original amount was. And so I've seen those servers walk away with hundreds of thousands of dollars in one night just by going out with the guest. If you had a sister, would you want her to work in nightlife? Why or why not? Temporarily. The thing with the Strip and with the nightclub industry, and that's why I left, is that it does have a very toxic nature to it. That's many people don't really talk about. You develop insomnia, which is something nobody ever talks about, which is something that I was very abrasive to and very loud about. And everyone walks around just very grumpy because you're going to bed at 6 in the morning to, let's say, noon. And then you're waking up much later in the day. You don't see that much sun. You're not getting vitamin D. So it really changes your mentality to it. But you can definitely accumulate a lot of money very fast in the lights of thousands of dollars in one night. So as long as you take that money and you put it towards something that you want to build, then it's a positive outcome. But unfortunately, most people become very comfortable with making six figures very fast, and they stay in the industry, and it ages a lot of people very fast. All the managers that I had were balding by 30. We had, unfortunately, a bunch of ODs while I was there. It's just the nature of it, where you want to basically imitate what you're doing, the service that you're giving. You want to have that imitated to you when you go out.
What kind of drugs are used on the Strip? Can you break that down for us by the labor force?
I would say the most prevalent is definitely cocaine by far. That is something that is asked very, very often. Omnia actually has a very strict policy, and most nightclubs do, where if somebody asks you for drugs, then you have to tell security, and then security gives them a warning or immediately kicks them out. But it puts the busser and the server in this awkward situation where the person is spending, let's say, $50,000 and asks for coke, and then you basically lose that potential for a tip. But then the Strip also has secret shoppers, where they pay somebody, or they give somebody who's a secret shopper, let's say $3,000 to go spend money at a nightclub, and then they purposely walk around asking for drugs and being very weird and strange, and then those reports get funneled back into the oversight commission, and then that gets sent back to the managers.
And when you talk about the money that's being made, can you give us some figures? Like, how much does a host make annually?
So when I was at Omnia, the top host made $600,000 in 2019, and that they get a commission based off of the table sale. So when I was there, we had 100 tables, or we'll just use that as an easy number. At Omnia Nightclub, we had 10 dance floor tables. Every dance floor table was gravitated around $10,000 to $20,000 beverage minimum. And the hosts will make anywhere from 1% to 6%, depending on how much that person spends. And that's on the total, that's not on the minimum. So the highest spending table I ever had was $200,000. So if the host is then getting 5% off of that, I'm terrible at math, but that's, I don't know, what, $5,000 or $10,000. So they come into an abnormal amount of money very fast.
Yeah. Now, I had talked with you before coming to class, and I asked if whales, these billionaires or millionaires or high net worth individuals, have low self-esteem, and that's why they're coming to the clubs. How would you describe their motives? What draws these mostly men to the nightclubs?
It's mostly about prestige and image. We have a bottle package, and this is very normal across all nightclubs, but it was kind of revolutionized in Vegas, where you have a champagne service, which is largely outpriced, $5,000, $10,000 for these bigger bottles. But when you order the bottle, you get this like crazy presentation with lights, and the girls will dress up to whatever fantasy the host has. They're like, oh, we'll dress up as ninjas or police officers or military people or Pokemon, or come out in a Barbie box like Star Wars, and there's all kinds of different presentations. And that's for the guest's liking. And the guest also, oftentimes, if they don't like the server that's in front of them, maybe it doesn't fit their look or aesthetic, then they can request another server, or they'll bring in 3 or 4 servers at one time.
It's funny because I did bottle service for my birthday. I paid for it for the first time this summer. And I have to say, there was a dopamine hit when the girls came out, and there was the lights and the poppers and the confetti, and it was in a private room. I can separate that as though that's fantasy and there's reality. How much do you think consumers of what the Strip offers, they can do that as well? The separation of understanding they're in town and that's fantasy, but it's not actually real.
I think the majority of guests kind of get sucked up into the fantasy and have a hard time disassociating from what's actual reality. When these guests order bottle service, it's known that quote unquote bottle rats will kind of just circle the table. So whenever there's lights, there's girls who come into the club consistently week over week. They look for these high net worth individuals, and then they go over to the table and try to either extract money from the guests by building a friendship with them and then going out with them afterwards and hopefully getting one of those gambling opportunities or anything of that nature. So I think a lot of these guests who continually come in, we had this one specific guest who was an LSU graduate, came in every week and spent $10,000 to $20,000 every single week and got the packages and was always leaving with different girls and different women. So to me, they're very much caught up in the lifestyle as much as the employees are as well.
Now, you did leave the Strip last April officially, if I'm not mistaken, timing-wise. What led to that decision for you?
I was developing a lot of bad habits from it. I definitely went on a drug and alcohol binge and was making a lot of bad decisions. And even though the money was great, it to me was not a sustainable life after seeing multiple friends lose their lives and people developing other bad habits, gambling addictions, alcohol abuse, and noticing myself going down the same direction. I had to kind of stand up and make a stand, and that's why working at Omnia, I was taking a lot of the capital that I was making and buying crypto, starting businesses, trying to find any way to get out of it. And when I did quit, a lot of the employees had this very sarcastic, like, you finally made it out, because everyone who gets into the club never leaves because it's probably the easiest amount of capital you can accumulate.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit more at the macro level. Circa opened recently, a few months ago, if I'm not mistaken on that, and Stadium Swim was quite popular there. Can you describe to everyone, what did that have as an impact on other existing nightclubs? What does competition do in town?
Yeah, so we see that with Circa and now with Zouk over at Resort World. And when I went to Omnia, Omnia was a brand new nightclub at the time. So a lot of these nightclubs, they get this like massive prestige. It depends on who the DJs are, who's the hospitality group that's backing it. And it creates this animosity between the strip because you're competing for a finite amount of capital. And Circa is a little different because they're downtown, where that was the first real club or day club that has existed downtown, so they don't really have any competition in that area. Whereas now we see with Zouk, they brought over hosts from all of the different nightclubs, from Excess, from Omnia, from Marquee, and then they also steal some of the servers as well and some of the other staff. And so it creates a sour taste. And although a lot of the execs and the employees of all these nightclubs help each other through getting free table service or free entry to all these clubs, you are essentially pulling money away out of everyone's pocket. And so there's a lot of disdain for other communities and other nightclubs.
Yeah. Questions that you have from Jake so far. I have a few otherwise that I can keep going with about competition, resources,
Yeah,
power.
please ask any questions.
You can introduce yourselves as well.
Hello, Carlos. I was curious about when it comes to the nightclub, how do you guys deal with, or how was it dealt with when the power dynamics wasn't necessarily explained? Where say some bussers thought they had more power than they did, or the waitresses had more power than they thought they did. How did that work out?
It usually comes from some sort of monetary compensation, and what I mean by this is the tip pool at Omnia and all the tip pools in the nightclub, from what I know, is set by the servers, because the management, if it's a union house, the management team is not allowed to embed themselves within the tip procedures. So if there was any animosity between the bussers and the servers would just say that we're going to change the tip out percentages at the end of the year. Or with bussers, at least how this works at Omnia, it kind of is different between different nightclubs. Any money that was handed directly to the busser gets to keep. So you would get some servers, if they favored the busser, they liked you, they would just hand you money directly and you get to walk away with $200-300. Whereas if some servers didn't like the busser, then they would do everything in their power to make sure the guest does not hand you any money. So it comes from them just preventing you from making any more money, which therefore then affects the table service, because now there's this weird hate between the busser and server, and you have to work for them for the entire night. So it is for me, from a busser perspective, you're taking care of the guest and the table service, but you also have to have this relationship with the server. So you're almost playing two different parts in one night.
That makes sense. I'd actually like for you all to turn to a partner and try to guess, what do you think is the highest paid or one of the highest paid bottle girls in town? Jake quoted me a number a few months ago, and I'm wondering if you all can guess. So chat with your partner for a moment and come up with a figure. All right, we're going to make this a little more interesting. To start, I actually want Jake to clarify a question that Kate asked, which I thought was quite thoughtful. Why are the bottle girls not called cocktail servers?
Yeah, so bottle girls are different from cocktails because in the nightclub, if you want to order a cocktail, you have to go to the bar. And so I think the marketing around it was that if you're calling someone a cocktail girl, then you're kind of like diminishing their power within the nightclub. So they're called bottle servers, or in the nightclub, it's actually called model bottle servers, because when we all apply for a nightclub, you have to go through auditions. If some of you are familiar with this, it's a very intense hiring process where you have to basically, and girls show up in bikinis, the guys show up shirtless, and you have to stand in the middle of the room, and they basically judge you, ask you a bunch of questions. And when I applied at Omnia, there were 2,000 bussers and 5,000 servers that applied, and only 70 of each position was hired.
This is, I mean, if you told my East Coast colleagues this, I feel like their minds would be blown. All right, annually, how much do you think a model bottle server, I'm trying to get this lingo down, makes? And I actually want to start with the guys in the room. I want to see if there's a gender effect. In the back, Joseph.
Well, you said at the top, and I went to like a minimum of like 7 figures, just based off of the thing that he said that, you know, some were given $250,000 to gamble and walk away with hundreds of thousands of dollars in a night.
Okay. Sounds good. 7 figures. Other numbers from the guys in the room. Abdul, what do you think? How much do these ladies make annually?
I'm thinking more about the venue, but he's saying that the top one, which is hard because there's like, you know, the way the commission is split between, you know, different parties. $500,000 to $1 million, depending. I mean, that's at the top of the top. They got the whales, they got everything set up, but I think $500,000.
So about $500,000 to $1 million.
Yeah.
How about for the ladies in the room? How much do you think the model bottle servers are making? Kayla?
I said at least $2
$2
million.
million. Other thoughts? Yes, Caitlin.
I'm going to argue probably of $500,000 because you said that the top host makes $600,000 a year, but on the power structure you also mentioned they're above the bottle girl, so I'm going to say a little bit less than $600,000.
Kate?
So we were thinking around like maybe 400 if you don't count the extra money outside of the working environment. But now I don't know.
So 400,000 is the low number, up to maybe $1 million or more. In reality,
So bottle server, depending on the nightclub, is generally anywhere around $150,000 to $250,000. And the reason, and this is only working 3 nights a week. So if there was an extra additional night, it could probably increase much more. But the reason for this is how the tip structure is set up, where at Omnia, the tip structure is 65% of the pool. It's a pooled house. 65% of the pool goes to the servers, 25% went to the bussers, and then 10% went to the bar staff. And that's just from table service. So, and then when it comes to bussers, it was 25% of that pool goes to all the bussers, but then any money that is directly given to the busser, whether it's cash or they write the busser's name on the check and say, I want to direct some of this tip pool to the busser, that's the direct outcome for that.
so a lot less than we said.
Yeah, but that's because they're only working 20 hours a week. Whereas if the host, who I mentioned was making 600,000, when you are a host, you are living a lifestyle. You're constantly on call. You don't have a clock in time or a clock out time, but they also book tables for the day club as well, if they're a really good host. So our top host was coming in, booking 3-4 dance floor tables at Omnia, and then in the morning going and booking tables at Wear Republic, probably around the same price.
Now let's contrast what the bottle girls are making with how much they bring in sales. Can you give us some statistics on that front?
Yeah, so every year that I was there, we had about two girls selling $1 million in sales or more per year. And that's through table service. And it becomes a little bit skewed because these girls are the ones that are working consistently on the dance floor, so they're getting higher end clients. Because of the political system, some people, including myself, didn't work in main room as much as we'd like to because we didn't have a friendly relationship with the management team, or the servers didn't prefer the busser, or the manager didn't prefer the server, because we had 3 different rooms that varied in different table minimums. So it becomes a little bit skewed because they're consistently down there because of the political structure.
When you say managers didn't prefer servers, is that alluding to the idea, did managers and servers ever have either sexual relationships or personal relationships?
Yeah, it's actually very, very, very common. One of our old GMs actually was fired for having a sexual relation with one of the servers, and there is a lot of alluding to sexual behaviors through the managers talking to the host, like, oh, what can you do for me now, kind of thing. Like, what will you do for me if I put you down on the dance floor where you'll make more money?
It sounds like this is an industry that fuels a lack of boundaries and professionalism, but yet it still is an organization. What are your thoughts on my statement there?
Yeah, when you combine sexuality with an abnormal amount of money, combined with superstar DJs and famous people, and also just a weird time hour, and also in Vegas where everyone just loses their inhibitions to come here, it becomes a chaotic scene where the boundaries are pretty much lowered and don't exist.
And when I talk about what we've discussed to colleagues, I try to explain to them that it's almost like it's a bubble, and we know environment shapes behavior. So if this is your normal day in, day out, it's only what you know. Like, you stop being able to understand that people outside of the Strip don't engage in these behaviors, and it does become intoxicating in a way.
And also within the industry, there's this massive amount or sense of entitlement from the employees because you are in this bubble. When the pandemic happened, a lot of the bussers, we used to joke and say which server is probably having the worst time right now because they lost their sense of identity because they aren't in this bubble or this environment where they're all put on pretty much on a pedestal where the servers don't have to clean anything, the bussers have to do anything, a bunch of the servers at the table, depending on who you get, they don't want to help in anything outside of communicating with the guest, where they're actually supposed to help bring dirty dishes back or help the busser with the ice or different things like that. Some of these servers don't help with anything because they believe that they're above that.
And I'm curious with the bottle girls, to kind of close out that part of the discussion, there's a power disparity in terms of how little money they're making relative to their organization or employer. Why do you think women stay in such a skewed power distribution? I mean, is it that they are making a lot of money in their minds, even though $150,000 relative to the $1 million in sales they're bringing in, that's a pretty big gap?
Yeah, I think for a bunch of these servers, not to sound offensive, but there's a lack of ambition for a lot of these servers. This is not just a nightclub, but just on the Strip, and I've noticed being born and raised out here is you don't need a degree or some sort of education to get into it. So the barrier to entry is just your network. And once you get in and you can make a bunch of money, there's some other positions on the Strip, like banquet servers, that make $300,000-$400,000 a year. So you basically check out of life, you become very comfortable with that lifestyle, and you don't want to build anything grander than that.
Where does your ambition come from then?
I think it comes from a humble beginnings. Didn't grow up with that much, and being from here, I always wanted Vegas to be more than just the Strip, and that was something that I had realized through working at the pool and going to UNLV and all these other things that I did, is that eventually the Strip is going to evolve into more, or Vegas is going to evolve into more than just the Strip. Just right now it's having a trouble doing that, so somebody has to be the person at the forefront to do that. And I decided after waiting around for a while that I was going to be one of those people.
Yeah, well, we're lucky to have you. Questions, Kate?
So going off what you just said, like, how do you think that the power dynamics will shift to get away from the Strip? Because there's so much power on the Strip, and especially in the casinos.
The shift that I see happening right now is a lot of tourists are actually migrating to the downtown and the Arts District area. And that's because the Strip has so much power. They're adding resort fees, convenience fees, surcharge fees, all these random fees. Even the gift shops now don't have pricing labels, and the gift shops charge based off of the occupancy rate within the casino. And now you have parking fees on top of that. There was the room tax fee and all these. So from the tourists that I communicate with and the different content creators, there has been a lot of demand down on Fremont Street. And so I think that trend is only going to continue. especially with Fremont Street, is open to innovation and different ideas. They're working with content creators and some of these other ideas that the Strip just doesn't have the capacity to do because of the corporate nature of it.
I didn't know that about the gift shops. It's like Amazon when the prices change every day.
Yeah. The Strip is finding any way to extract as much value as they can from their guests, and a lot of the guests are noticing. And if you follow Vital Vegas on Twitter, he's like the top rumors guy. He's very vocal about this, that he receives these kind of emails and messaging from a lot of the Vegas tourists.
Wow. Other questions that you have for Jake?
I have a question. Are you a local?
Yeah.
Talk like one because everyone thinks you live on the Strip.
Yeah, I'm born and raised out here. I actually live downtown Vegas.
Can you clarify for a transplant like me? What do you mean he doesn't talk like he lives here?
Well, he mentioned that he wants to expand Vegas outside the Strip. So usually when people think of Vegas, they literally just think of Las Vegas Boulevard. There is no Vegas outside.
Yeah, I've been asked many, many times if I helicopter into work every weekend, what hotel room do I live in? There are a large amount of tourists that have no idea what exists outside the Strip, but it is becoming much more noticeable with the rise of a bunch of content creators who create content walking around the Strip. There is a lot of demand for things outside of that because they're all being nickel and dimed.
Michael?
Would you say the power, as you said, you're trying to sort of move Vegas away from the Strip in an aspect. Would you say that that's being benefited by business hubs such as Chicago, Seattle, Portland, with their sort of move into the arts?
Yes.
And as well as things like Amazon coming into town and stuff and becoming and setting up more or less a business hub, much like how Seattle has become just a Amazon-based operation as a whole.
Yeah, Vegas goes through these repurposing phases every 15 to 20 years. In the 40s, it was built for the people who are working on Hoover Dam to come in and get away, have sex, do all these crazy things. In the 70s, it was all about dollar cocktails coming out, good dinners. In the 90s, it was very family centric. We had Wet n Wild and the MGM theme park. Every casino had an arcade. And then the recent trend that started popping up in the late 2000s was the nightlife, day life, residency, luxury lifestyle. And now the trend that I see is Vegas is becoming a sports town, a convention town, and also there's a blooming tech scene that I've been participating in as well. And so this is why I do, a little off topic, this is why I do the blockchain endeavors, because it's a multi-billion-dollar opportunity to bridge Vegas off of tourism dependency. And it's been quite a hurdle, but the conversations are now continually ongoing.
How many of you, by a show of hands, consider yourselves locals? And of those who have their hands up, how many are planning to stay in town after you graduate? Pretty much everybody.
From the guests that I've had on the podcast, only 25% of Las Vegas locals are actually born in Las Vegas. And I've noticed that if somebody stays in Vegas for about 2 years that isn't from Vegas, they tend to stay here forever.
I'd like to ask the class to do another exercise. If you were describing to a transplant, we're actually hiring a new faculty member in my department this year. What are 3 adjectives you would use to describe Las Vegas? It can be to a new faculty member, it can be to somebody outside of academia. What are 3 adjectives you would use to describe Las Vegas and why? Take a moment and chat with your partner. Jake and I were wondering before we asked you about your adjectives, how many of you, by a show of hands, have been to the nightclubs here in town? How about the day clubs? Oh, we're going to talk about that. Jordan, what were your 3 adjectives that you and your partner discussed?
So we did convenience. It's 24/7. It's not one word. And probably busy. Right? It's like, hustle and bustle.
Yeah, a lot going
A
on.
lot of like tourist traffic in and out.
Yep. Omar, how about you? Did I see Omar? Yes, in the back.
Hot, cold, windy.
Interesting. So we have convenient, 24/7, busy, hot, cold, and windy. Kate?
Go ahead.
Chaotic, lively, and innovative.
Ooh, chaotic, lively, and innovative. Abdul?
I was gonna say, like, hype, 24 hours, and there's only.
Well, I was like on the other spectrum. I said it was disgusting.
What do you find disgusting?
Maybe it's because I was like born and raised here, but I just feel like there's a lot of potential. I mean, I was telling him like I guess I'm on the different spectrum because like I'm in real estate, so like I see like Vegas as like different than like most people would, I guess, because like there's so many potential in like really nice neighborhoods, and like now they're like just trashed, and like the potential is definitely lost there, and it's just because like instead of like fixing what needs to be fixed, they just go and expand, and
Yes.
like focusing on what really Vegas used to be.
So growth for the sake of growth, but not with actually any intention or cleanliness behind it. Catherine?
Our adjectives were surprising, routine, and bright.
Routine and bright. Interesting. Over here.
So ours were kind of similar but different, but we got always open, we've got a dichotomy and connectivity.
Ooh, love that. In the back.
We said community-based, alive, and
And,
misleading.
ooh, tell me more about misleading.
So when it comes to like Vegas, everyone always thinks you know the strip. But Vegas is so much more than just that. You have the arts district that's really coming alive and has been alive for the past 30 years. And we have a lot of cultural festivals here that, like, Vegas is such a interconnected, homogeneous, but also heterogeneous place where there's so many different cultures coming here, and we have a Hawaiian festival coming up, a Greek festival. There's like a new festival every single week because there's so many.
Yeah.
And you only see the strip, but there's so much more happening outside.
The Strip is the most visible place on Earth from outer space, which also I think metaphorically captures what you're saying when people come here. It's the focus, but it's really actually myopic to only look at that. I want to ask a question if you all feel comfortable answering. So some of your responses weren't exactly positive. So I'm wondering what keeps you here? You live here. Why don't you turn to your partner and discuss that, and then we'll come back as a class.
Interesting.
I have to call him out on it.
You know, it's about opportunity.
Yeah.
It's literally.
Because there's a reason that they're living and working and raising families, in this area.
Being in the infancy stages of the city.
Because if I heard their descriptors, I wouldn't want to come here.
Yeah, right? There's some good ones, though. Misleading's a pretty good one.
Innovative, I like.
Innovative, yeah. The Strip is really good at innovating in the physical sense. They're really bad at innovating with technology.
Oh, I've heard this.
But they're really good at innovating with lighting and glamorizing and things like that. But they've done a terrible job with applying like technology to things that they do.
That's what I keep hearing. I actually am starting to organize events for the Penn Alumni Club, and I want to talk to the folks that are on the leadership board, because there are a lot of high-ranking executives in town, and I want to start asking them more some of these questions, because I feel like I'll have their ears, so I'm curious what they'll say. Yeah. Do you have any questions you want to ask them? If you do, of course, again, please feel free.
Nothing comes to mind yet. I'm sure some other things will pop up.
And do you want to take a break? That clock is an hour behind.
I'm fine.
Okay. I'm thinking we can go through 10:30, and then we'll leave time if they want to come up and talk to you, and enough transition for the next class.
What time's the next class start?
11:30.
But and then like LA.
Yeah, usually for guest speakers, I aim for between like an hour and a half because I feel like that's their attention span. Yeah.
That's most of us now.
I know. And we all need breaks in between and yeah, to stretch our legs, go outside. Curious what keeps you here if you feel like there's less positive descriptors of town, all the way in the back.
For me, it's families and weather. Like, I'm from the Midwest. I hate shoveling stuff. And then my daughters are here. And I was just telling my partner that, if my daughters are like, oh, well, we're going to move to so-and-so, I'm like, great, I guess I'm moving. Because I'm not going to be here without my family.
Yeah.
But that's pretty much for me. That's it.
So family keeps you here, but you're not bound to stay here if family is mobile.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're young. They want to live their life and do things. So I'll just be the creepy stalker mom.
Yeah. Carlos.
Passing of time. The more you stay here, the more you build up a community, a family, the friendships, connections. The more time passes, the least likely you're to leave.
So if you stay here and you build up community, does that suggest that you are experiencing agency because you're choosing to stay here, or do you feel stuck here?
I think for me personally, it's just I've lived here the majority of my life. I've built up like my friendships here. My family stays here. The majority of my family's here too. It's more of like I have a lot that I could have here that I need for more of the needs. And then if I just want to go explore, I do have the option to go explore.
Yes, and you're welcome, of course, to chime in. Abdul.
I wasn't like really negative on this because like I see it with any town, any place. You see there's like the positive, there's the negative, there's the up, there's the like, you got to look at it as a bigger picture. And for me, I think more it's like wherever you grow up, wherever you're used to, like it's a familiar, like you're used to being in that environment. You know what's where, it's like more comfortable for you. So that's why you're less likely to move. That's why a lot of people said family, because like you grew in it, like you have everything there. Like for me, if I go out of town, like out of country or anywhere, I like, I'll go have fun, but then I'm like, oh, I gotta go back home. Like it's just when you're used to a place, that's what the way it is.
Yeah, the comfort, the familiarity. Joseph, and then Kayla.
I was just gonna say, one of the things that I noticed, like when you could tell, like people had pride in being from the city, was when they brought the Knights here, and so a lot of people, in the city were like, oh, like it's crazy bringing hockey to the desert, right? But you knew there was a sense of pride in our city that we had that when they brought that team over here, and how everyone just kind of funneled in, and to this day, still support something like that.
One of the things I was told is that the Knights has really created a force that people can coalesce around that was lacking in town before. Yeah, Kayla.
For me personally, it's just because when you're a local, like in any city, you can network a lot easier. So it's like I've already built up all these connections that if I were to move, I'd like literally have to start all over again in a business.
It really sounds like relationships drive the decisions to stay. Caitlin, and you had a question as well.
I had a question. Oh, that was a while ago. Mine was actually kind of related to her, but kind of opposite, where it is actually the relationships. I really like Vegas for the people, not because of the people that I've made, but just who they are as a culture. I came from California, hated that environment, no offense to that, and I have family that pretty much lives all over the world, and I'll visit them and see the people in that area, or like if you go to different universities to see how people act towards you. For me, an example is we visited Harvard just to see it, and I instantly knew pretty much after the tour, I did not want to be there, not because the campus wasn't beautiful or anything like that. I didn't like how I was treated. And here in Vegas, just the way the community is built and the diversity and the acceptance, I stay here because of the people.
How are you treated at Harvard? I used to work there.
Sorry.
I mean, I'm not surprised that you're saying that.
It felt very like, oh, you're not in here, I'm going to look down upon you. It felt very judgmental without even, we had a tour guide and it was fine, but everybody there just felt like closed off.
Welcome to the Ivy Leagues. Academia is probably the most elite institution in the world, in my opinion. And once you get into these tiers and these rankings, and it depends on who you are, of course, because not everyone is like this, but who you are, where you came from, your family, the way you dress, it all becomes markers of judgment. And usually the judgment is that you're not enough, quite frankly, which is not a good place for, I think, for most people to be. Lots of hands.
Hi.
Darian.
One of the big reasons why I love Vegas and why I stay in Vegas, I'm planning to stay in Vegas, is community. Especially going off today's date. Today's the anniversary of the October shooting that happened around 91. And the Knights that was their first season that they played. And so what I got to see, I was working on the Strip when that catastrophic event happened. And it was mayhem. It was really kind of traumatic experience. And when the Knights came in, it really gave everybody kind of like a distraction and a sense of like belonging and of just getting everybody together. So when the Knights came, it was beautiful to happen. It was beautiful
Yeah.
to see.
I read an article that I think it was a journalism faculty member from UNLV wrote about October 1, and she made a number of points that I'm curious for your thoughts on. One, evidently, I was not living here when 1 October happened, so this is again from my read of the article. The PR folks for the Conventions and Visitors Bureau immediately met in their war room, as the article called it, after the shooting was happening, and they branded the slogan Vegas Strong. And the community was outraged because the community, according to this article, said, what about Vegas trauma or sadness or depression or anxiety? And people felt locally that Vegas Strong actually delegitimized and took away from their experiences that were not about strength, that really were about the tragedy itself that were happening. But why do you think they came up with Vegas Strong? Because trauma, depression, anxiety, and grief are bad for business. Tourists aren't going to come here if we have Vegas sad or Vegas anxious. I also was reading in this article that there was somebody in Illinois who built crosses, one for every person who was killed in the tragedy, in the shooting. And this person drove across country to put these up down by the Strip. And the crosses were all taken down because you don't want to have photos of the Las Vegas sign on social media with crosses. Once again, bad for business, according to this article. I thought that was quite eye-opening. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on this and the optics, right, of how the shooting was managed in light of the fact that so much money comes in on the Strip from tourists, and we do want them to come. Abdul?
Well, I feel like it's more to the idea of that you don't want people to be afraid or be in fear, because Vegas is like the hangover, like everybody wants to come party, have fun, that facade, like, yeah, you know, we can do anything. And it's like if you keep getting reminded of like somebody shooting at you, you don't feel like having fun, you're more paranoid, you're looking around.
Exactly.
So it's not really going to help the city, and it's not going to help the people, because you know, some lunatic did something, but it doesn't mean that to live in fear, because life's short.
The article, as you can tell, had a bit of a critical slant. Also said that unlike in New York City, where there is space and a memorial for the tragedy that happened out there, there's nowhere in Las Vegas where we commemorate 1 October. And so you can go to Ground Zero, New York City, and see, you know, what the city has done, again, to honor those who lost their lives. But Vegas won't do that because it, again, wouldn't attract the businesses that we want. I'll take a few hands. I'm curious for your thoughts. Catherine.
I live in Piccoli Ranch, and the HOA over there, they have kind of like a memorial bench in their green belt. There's a disc golf course over there that's fairly popular, and it's got the Vegas Strong with the Strip skyline and a star for every single one of the victims. And every year, I think they're probably putting up the signs right now. They have these signs, but that's in a residential neighborhood that is like there's no way that you're just going to accidentally drive by it if you're a tourist. You're not going to see that unless you know it's there to go.
Yeah, I had never, yeah.
Nowhere near where the festival was.
Right.
There is an October 1 memorial garden down in the Arts District. It is kind of off to the side, but they never do promote it. But it has like nice waterfall and everyone's name. That was a part of it.
I'm guessing today it'll get more, hopefully.
Yeah.
Maybe some, like a spotlight. Yes.
I have friends that are in architecture, and this past semester they had a project on designing and engineering like a memorial for the October 1. And I think the thing is the city hasn't decided if they're going to do it on Strip or off Strip yet. So I do think they are trying to do something like that they did in New York.
That's interesting to know. Caitlin.
So perhaps this is just not on the Strip, but to me, Vegas Strong actually was very positive. It made me proud of our people because we are struggling through all of this, but we were standing strong to support each other. And granted, like everybody's been saying, it was off the Strip, but pretty much you'll still see so many cars on the road with hashtag Vegas Strong on them. There's a route that I take home where there is a whole wall on the street that's been graffitied with a heart that has every name that was pretty much injured and or killed on there. And what I find really nice about Vegas, well, granted, this is not on the Strip, it's not advertised, it's the people in Vegas outside of the Strip who advertise it and, well, show their respects and such.
Yeah. Carlos.
Kind of piggybacking off that, when you said that the Strip kind of like took down the crosses and everything, I believe they went at the wrong way because they were just more focused on the outside people of Vegas. They didn't really care so much about people within Vegas. So the
Right.
Vegas Strong, even though the marketing took it as Vegas Strong as a way to not cause fear, I think the locals took it more as a positive note.
Yeah.
Us personally as a business, we kind of used that as well, and it was our most selling decal at the time for like the rest of the year. We were selling it for like $1 at a time. From October all the way to the end of the year, almost every person that came in always came in for that decal. We
Wow.
still see some of those people with Vegas Strong nowadays. So kind of what Kate said is, it was a positive note that they could unify for.
Yeah, it is, I think, one of the most recognizable like logos, right, where we live. Like it's pervasive. Yes.
And I would just like to say that the Las Vegas Strip does not represent our community. A lot of the places where we remember all the lives lost on people that were injured are within different sectors of the community, like downtown with the Memorial Garden. That isn't the Strip. We don't have a whole lot of tourists going, but we do have a lot of community members that are constantly on Fremont, or students that are down there for different arts events. So those are our community centers, our community structures, and that's where we go.
And to put it in power language, the Strip has the most resources, but it's not what defines our identity as locals. I think that's a fascinating contrast. Would love to hear your thoughts on any of this.
Yeah, just speaking on the communities, I've noticed that there's two distinct Vegas communities. We have the locals, but then we have what I like to call secondary residents, which is the people who visit Vegas multiple times per year and has a large fascination and appreciation for the city. If you ever go on Twitter, there's a fairly large Vegas Twitter community of maybe tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people. And these people, they want to know every single thing that's happening in Vegas, from a menu change to a price increase to a new club opening, casino sales, anything that has to do with downtown, the Arts District, and the Strip. They want to know every little detail to it. So that's why Vegas is very unique, because it's not just the locals who have a fascination and appreciation for the city. It's 40 million people who visit here a year who are also tapped into it. So the residence goes beyond just your physical location.
Yeah. I'm curious, switching tracks slightly. You were once in these seats. You did have a class in this building. As a senior, what do you wish you knew back then that you know now about power?
In terms of Vegas, the city's built on networking. I like to call it the name drop economy, or kind of the instant gratification town. And not to sound very, very strange, but the majority of people that I have on the podcast that graduated from UNLV didn't use their degree professionally. So that means that there are plentiful amount of opportunities out here in Las Vegas. And it all comes from the networking and I guess the power that you can attain from a relationship that you build, whether it's somebody on the Strip or off the Strip. I ask, for those who made it all the way through the end of the podcast, I asked the same question to all my guests on the way out. I asked them, what does Las Vegas mean to you? I would say probably 80% of the time out of 160 episodes, everyone says opportunity. Opportunity. And that's majorly from people who have moved into Las Vegas. And a lot of people have realized that Vegas is about 100 years old, but we are a very new city, and we're kind of going through this cultural renaissance where the city is kind of building an identity off of the Strip, and this has really taken hold over maybe the last 5 to 10 years. And so the degrees of separation within those who are contributing to the Vegas economy is much smaller than what you see in mature cities like Chicago and LA and New York. So I would say here you could probably reach any person within 2 to 3 degrees of separation, where larger cities, and that's where the power becomes more increased. To reach somebody who has power in LA, you probably have to go through 6 to 10 different people to reach that person. Where in Vegas, it's maybe 2 to 3. So the power in Vegas isn't as separated as some of these other cities.
Yeah, it's really a small town. Who's one of more your unique podcast guests that you feel like you were delighted to have and maybe kind of stands out for you?
Well, I mean, we could just go off the recent one. Riley Rabbit actually is a former sex worker who lived at Bunny Ranch. And so she had very interesting things to say about the power dynamics of living in a brothel. And she doesn't work in a brothel anymore, but she talked about how a lot of men would come in and they're all looking for sex, but they all look for sex for different reasons. Some men felt that they had lost power within their own relationship or their own position. Some were fired. Some men didn't even want to have sex. They just wanted somebody to talk to. So the different reasons of why men would come to have sex with somebody kind of caught me off guard, because you think it's generally for some sort of sexual fantasy, but it seemed like it actually was not the case for most of the reasons.
It sounds like it's for intimacy.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's what, especially out here in Vegas, you could feel very alone. And this was very common in the nightclub that I was working at. You're surrounded by 200 models, right, who've been vetted to be considered like to fit this Vegas superficial aesthetic, beautiful, a lot of different surgeries, people take care of themselves. But everyone in the nightclub feels very alone. And I think it has to do with the insomnia that you develop, but also everyone's making a lot of money, so there's a lot of comparing and contrasting happening between you and your coworkers. So it's a very lonely city. And also, working on a grave, you start work at 9 p.m., you get off around 5 a.m., and in the wintertime it gets dark at 4 p.m. So you're really only seeing the sun for maybe an hour or two every day. So a lot of people develop wintertime depression, which is also something that's not really discussed.
Yeah. How much have you reconciled what you're describing? Like how comfortable, if you feel comfortable saying, are you with being alone or some of these other aspects that you worked in?
Yeah, I used to, when I was at UNLV, the second I turned 21, I was going to Surrender Nightclub every Wednesday for like a year and continuing going to it. And you felt very close. And I had a very large issue with being alone. I wanted to do everything with everybody. But now, after working at the nightclub, I became much more comfortable with being alone. And I did have to go through some mental battles to distinguish what alone meant, whether it's a depressive alone or a comfortable alone. And so that took a lot of time to develop, but that's one of the main reasons why I left the nightclub. Even though I was able to find a distinction between it was very hard to separate.
Yes.
And it took almost about a year after quitting the nightclub to get back to a normal sleeping schedule, but then also to feel like I was a part of the community, because you feel like you're in this world of maybe 10,000 people or 50,000 people who are working graveyard. So you become very detached because you can't go out and have lunch or breakfast with somebody at 10 a.m. because you're going to bed at 6 a.m. You're working on the weekend, so you're not going to any events or concerts or any of the things that Vegas is acclaimed to be. You don't get to participate in any of that. So it's a very lonely road that most of my colleagues were never able to overcome.
What, if anything, do you miss about the nightlife and working in that industry?
Ooh, the allure, the attraction, the ability to feel famous even though you may not be. Some of the guests who are coming in, and so my largest table spend was $200,000, and you feel like you're a part of that group, because even though that guest is spending $200,000, you're taking care of them, they're talking to you, you're getting their phone number, you may be scheduling to meet with them another time. And so you get to party with everyone. You get the benefits of partying without having to spend the money. But then on the contrary, you want to go out and try to imitate that on your off days. So that's where you get in this temptative trap where you make maybe a few $1,000s in a week, but then you go right back out and spend it at the nightclub or at the strip club or wherever that you're going. So it's a two-pronged approach.
I've been told that women often spend the money they make working in the nightlife on trips, fancy clothes, restaurants, and there's not a lot of financial literacy, and then there's not a lot of like long-term investing or planning. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So when the pandemic happened, there were a handful of servers that I knew that had maybe $5,000 to $7,000 in bills per month and had to start selling off assets immediately because they weren't able to compensate with their living style with the $600 a week from unemployment. So many people don't really plan for the future. I've noticed working in the nightclub, and this is myself including, for the first few years, you tend to just splurge as much as possible. My first year at the nightclub, well, second year, my first year I was still a student at UNLV. I went and traveled the country going to music festivals and partying and all of this stuff. But then it wasn't until the third year I realized that a lot of the behaviors that I was engaging with was self-deprecating, and it was ultimately going to lead to my demise. But most people look past that because their friend circle or their close group engages in the same exact activities as themselves. So unless you could separate yourself from that, then most people have a very short road.
What do you feel like you've learned the most about yourself in the last decade?
Wow, that'd be from almost graduating high school to now. I think Vegas has an enormous amount of opportunity where anybody could be whoever they want to be, as long as you dedicate your resources to the right endeavors, whether it's building a business or investing or whatever new opportunities present themselves. But Vegas presents dozens of opportunities per day, whether it's somebody that you meet who then you can have a business relationship with them, or you see something new popping up in Vegas, like a blooming tech industry or a new nightclub that maybe you can invest in. There's an enormous amount of opportunity. You just have to make sure that you're aware that Vegas probably has the most temptation out of any city in the world. I'll go beyond to say that. But its diverse economy, or its diverse nature culturally, politically, and the entertainment aspects just creates an abnormal amount of opportunity.
Any final closing thoughts, Jake, for our class on power, and then we'll take a few questions.
There's a lot of power in Las Vegas. I do still believe that women control the power in Las Vegas, but the executive structure of the Strip is male dominated. It's becoming more female. There's going to be more females in the power roles. But most women choose to be in the hospitality role or the customer service role because you can make so much money so fast. And so that's where the true power lies. The hosts, the Vegas used to be controlled by casino hosts, which now has become an antiquated position. Now the VIP hosts are the ones that control pretty much the Strip because that's where people want to go and they want to feel famous and the glamorization and feel comfortable. So the power structure tends to shift in positions, but women are the ones that still control it.
Who's the most powerful woman in Las Vegas that you know?
Ooh.
Actually, let me ask the class as the last question for them to discuss. Who's the most powerful woman in Las Vegas that you all know? You can chat with your partner and then we'll see what you have to say.
I can tell you it's definitely not Carolyn Goodman.
All right, any names? Who's the most powerful woman in town? If anybody. Yes, Joseph.
I said Carolyn Good.
Oh,
Oh, yeah.
that's actually what,
Yeah, so we were talking up here, and I told her the one woman who actually has no power in Vegas is Carolyn Goodman. Because most people don't realize it, but the Strip is unincorporated, so Carolyn Goodman has no jurisdiction over the Strip. They actually govern themselves. So when she goes on air and talks about the Strip, she's talking as in terms of a relationship with the Strip without authority.
yes.
But that's not compared to like the ability that she has to get stuff done though in the city though.
Yeah, yes and no. The Vegas has multiple mayors. They also have a Northern Las Vegas mayor as well. So her power is not as strong as a lot of people like to think. She's a little bit more of a face than anything. Granted, she does have a lot of power, but if in the terms of discussion, we talk about the Strip having the most power, where she has no authority over.
In the back.
To bounce off of that a little bit, the question was what woman in Las Vegas has the most power. It wasn't what woman on the Las Vegas Strip has the most power. So I can see where Joseph got his answer. But I understand what you're saying, even in terms of whether she has power or not. I think she's basically a figurehead, and the people around her are the ones who have power. But I think for me personally, I could give you names of women that I feel like are in power, and nobody in this room would know them because I feel like they're powerful in their industry as opposed to powerful women on the Strip. Because it seems like a lot of the conversation today has been about the power on the Strip and not the power in the city. And so even though I work in gaming, I work in IT. So there's a lot of women that I work with who I think are amazing people that a person would want to emulate. I tell my daughters about them. I'm like, I have these strong, powerful women in IT who are telling men what to do. It's very cool to see because I work in a male-dominated field. And so I think that's kind of, we've been talking a lot about like the public face of Las Vegas and the casinos and all this, but we haven't talked a lot about the structure around it. That's where a lot of the power actually comes from.
And why do you think that is, that the attention gets focused on the non-executives, the non-IT folks?
Because it's all what makes the money.
Mm-hmm.
It's the face of Las Vegas is our tourism. So like I said, I work, and IT is considered a service industry, just like, casinos. We're both categorized as service industries, but we're the back end of it. Like the nightclubs are not going to be able to operate without a structure underneath it, but we're not seen, we're like invisible. So it's kind of a misnomer to think that the people who work in the background don't have any play in what's going on. And I think it's also interesting when you say, like, if the men left the Strip, like, and the women were running it, it would still run. But if the men left the Strip, there'd be no reason for the Strip because the men are the ones that you even said are coming in and spending the millions of dollars a night. So it's really the men, regardless of whether the women are there or not, are the ones with all the power. So.
This same article I read about 1 October talks about how invisible the labor force in Las Vegas on and off the Strip is. Because even my academic colleagues, who you would think have a little bit higher level of thoughtfulness than maybe some people, it's like blank stares. Like they don't understand, and we talked about this in the podcast, that there's a whole infrastructure, right, that supports the Strip that we really don't give a lot of credence to. And yet they have their own dynamics, including around power, like you're describing with these female executives. So part of my job, I always think, is to educate people who don't live here, to explain the Strip is an organization. It has the same forces, the same actors as any industry. But because of where the money is coming in, we do turn the spotlight on the hosts and, again, this power hierarchy that we've been describing.
Yeah, if I had to throw one name out there, I would say it's probably Elaine Wynn. And the reason why I say this is because the Strip actually runs Nevada. The reason why the Strip reopened after 2.5 months of closing is that the casinos threatened to stop paying state taxes to Sisolak.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So he was basically forced to reopen, which shows that they actually have power over any political leader. Elaine Wynn is a billionaire who is divorced from one of the most powerful men in the state. And so she therefore shares that power because she was married to him. And she has a very strong foundation out here as well. So even though she may not be in the forefront, she's in the background pulling some strings. But I do think that the women power structure in Vegas is more decentralized than just one central figure.
And for you all to think about as you move forward in your career, so my firm belief is you can certainly go to those who are in the spotlight, the hosts, for example, build relationships and have access to power by being next to them. But the way you actually play the power game is to connect with the people who are actually in the infrastructure and driving the spotlight. And you can decide which is more accessible, if one is more appealing, or where you feel comfortable or you want to belong, if any of those places. But if I were making the choice to kick it with a host or these, executives, male or female, I would want to go to that, because that's actually how you access power, is on the back end. And then you have to ask yourself, does power have to be loud? Does it have to be visible in order for you to feel powerful? The host would probably say yes, because of what they do for a living. I think I told you guys this story. I was at a place over the summer, and the host pulled out his cell phone and started showing me all his contacts in the NFL, and all his contacts started with the word NFL. I think he was trying to impress me, but I don't know anybody in the NFL, so it didn't really. He's like, do you know this guy and this guy? And I said, no, I don't. And then I wanted to be like, do you want to see who's in my phone? This academic who wrote this book, and this academic who's on the New York Times bestseller list. Clearly, we were not aligned in what power is, but it's something, again, for you to think about is, where do you think power should be accessed? Where is it available to you? And what kind of power do you want, if you want it at all? Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna agree with it's like who you know in the city versus like, because you don't have to essentially spend tens of thousands of dollars if you just know the right people. Because I got friends in the industry, and I remember a buddy I met from 2 Chainz to G-Eazy. Like he had the table, everything set up, and G-Eazy came over because we had like one of the basketball players, and I forgot his name, but he was there, so he said what's up to him, said what's up to all the table, and it's just like who you know. If you know the right people, you can get anywhere.
We'll take a couple more questions.
To sort of segue off that, it really is, and kind of what you said, where it really depends on the industry of who you find powerful here in Vegas. Because like my aunt, for example, she's one of the top 10 attorneys in Nevada, and so like her name's Tracy McNeely, and she like just recently my roommate was working, and the lawyer came in and started talking to him, and he was like, oh, you can always come to my firm. And he was like, no, my roommate's aunt is the lawyer, I'll probably go to her. And he was like, oh, what's her name? He goes, it's like Tracy M. And the lawyer immediately knew who it was and was like, oh, Tracy McNeil. Okay, I see what you're talking about. But then I have friends who are showgirls on the strip who work every night, and there's like a group of them that I went to high school with. And they come home and they're constantly traveling, they're meeting up with celebrities and stuff like that, as well as just making tons and tons of money from just being showgirls and just splitting up the wages between them, because they work like 2 a night, and then the next set takes over, and they have their own sort of small like little business that they're doing, and they gain power from that, as well as they are able to travel, so they must be making some sort of money to be able to do these luxurious travels and stuff like that. So I think it just depends on which industry you look at.
I'm reminded by this article I read recently for my video model research. It's on dirty work, which is a sociological term that refers to work that's morally, socially, or physically tainted. Garbage collectors, prostitutes as an example. And the article talked about the concept of stickiness, which is when you're a showgirl, let's say as an example, although that may not be the purest form of dirty work, but if you work in a dirty work profession, how even after you leave that profession, how much the dirty work sticks to you, and how society isn't willing to look at you as clean. Because if you're doing dirty work, then you must be a dirty worker as a person, you must be a dirty individual. And so I sent it to a former student who used to bartend at one of the strip clubs in town at Rhino. And she wrote back and she's like, this is what I face. Like, she's trying to transition to corporate America and accounting. Do you think PricewaterhouseCoopers is going to be impressed that you were a bartender at Rhino? Like, come on now. Corporate America is not exactly the nicest place to hang, and accounting tends to be pretty male dominated. And so it just has struck me as you're talking that one of the challenges I think in town is some of these industries that people work in, particularly women, have a stigma. Whether or not we agree with that stigma, we can discuss that, but that these labels often don't leave you, even though you leave the industry. So something to think about when you meet people who work in professions, and whether or not we are judging them as still being a prostitute and what that means and so forth. For me, it's really important to not judge people based on anything that they've done, but really on who they're presenting themselves to be in their character. But it's not how we're socialized, right, to respond to other people. Danny?
I forgot her first name, I can't think of it, but Mrs. Adelson, I think she's a really good footing in the whole overall of Las Vegas. I mean, obviously she was married to Mr. Adelson who passed away, but they had footing in the Sam and the Venetian, as well as Mrs. Adelson, she actually is a physician, so she has a lot of a pretty big footing in the medical field here, as well as she's one of the lead, she owns one of the lead methadone clinics in town, so she's a really big face for substance use disorder in Las Vegas itself. She runs the Association for Substance Use Disorder, and then as well as they also fund a K through 12 school, so she has a very big footing in the education system because she does fund part of Las Vegas's education as well.
I'm super biased, but I always want to tell millionaires, if you're looking for ways to invest in your community, get your name on a building at a university, because it will never go away. And it will always be called, the Chung Building, School of Business or so forth. So good for her for using her resources in that way. Thoughts that you have on any of this?
Yeah, I forgot about Mrs. Adelson. I have a bunch of friends. I was in the API fraternity here at UNLV, so I had a bunch of colleagues who went to Adelson campus.
Oh, cool.
They do a lot of nonprofit endeavors from that. So also,
Yeah.
It goes again with the degree, which I don't think one woman has central power here. It's a little bit more distributed than a lot of the other economies, but they do have a lot of soft power, hidden power.
Yes. Well, this brings us to our close. Carlos, last but not least.
Kind of going based off that with the whole soft power, I want to say maybe like for a personal aspect, the woman that has the most power in my life would be my mom, especially with our clientele that we've noticed, stuff that I've noticed throughout the years that I've been working in the family business. Our clientele take time out of their day, say my mom doesn't go to work, they ask where is she okay? Or like the times that she was really sick, they would take time out of their day to go take her medicine, go take her food. People respect her, people fear her from what we've seen. And the two instances that I've noticed the best, this soft power she has, was like the VIP hosts for Senior Frogs, like they're the ones who host the event. When she was really sick, they offered to take time out of their own day, like their sleeping schedule, to go check up on her, make sure like she was okay for us. And then another instance was there was a client who was kind of like causing ruckus at the shop. And when he was threatening like me, my brother, and my dad, it didn't cause much commotion. But the instant she threatened my mom, everybody that was inside the shop, all the clientele like was ready to jump the guy. Like once he threatened my mom, that's when like the whole dynamic shift. So that's what I've noticed. Like my mom has a lot of power that she doesn't realize she does.
Why did the dynamic shift? Did they feel protective of her because she was a woman?
I think so, but at the same time, a lot of our clientele see her as like a guiding light, or they see her like a mother figure, or like an auntie figure, or they'll come to her for advice. A lot of our clientele call her mom as well, or call her aunt, or just come to her for advice, and they see her as a guiding figure as well.
Again, the power of relationships. Jake, I want to thank you for coming to class. Let's give him a round of applause. Jake is going to hang out for a little bit. If you want to come up, take photos, chat with him a bit further. Otherwise, I will see you all next Friday. Stay safe and have a great weekend.
Thanks, guys.